Now this is the Sony HT-A5000 Atmos soundbar, and it's an absolute unit. Now just like some of Samsung's newer soundbars that have Q-Symphony support, if you were to use the HT-A5000 with a compatible Sony Bravia TV, then the soundbar and the built-in speakers on your TV are going to work together. However, unlike Samsung soundbars, which are kind of dependent on a Q-Symphony TV, the HT-A5000 is able to stand all on its own. Now, the standout characteristic of this soundbar is that it just has a ton of bass all on its own. And it also has an HDMI input that supports 4K 120Hz, and it even supports up to 8K HDR. However, there are some quirks about this soundbar that I gotta point out, like its rather shallow sound signature, its lackluster app, and then there's just its sheer size. However, if you're someone that's looking for a ton of bass out of their soundbar, whether you're a Sony Bravia owner or not, then the HT-A5000 might be up your alley. Now, regarding pricing, the HT-A5000 retails for a cool $1,000, but just knowing Sony, I do expect this soundbar to go on sale on a regular basis. And the A5000 is in line with both the Bose Smart Soundbar 900 and the Samsung HWQ-800A. Now, in this review, we're only going to be focusing on the A5000. Now, like I mentioned earlier, you can use the A5000 with a compatible Sony Bravia TV and use your TV's built-in speakers in tandem with this soundbar, just like how you can with some of Samsung's newer Q-Symphony TVs and soundbars. But unlike Samsung soundbars, which are kind of dependent on a Q-Symphony TV, the A5000 is able to stand all on its own. Now you can also go ahead and add an external subwoofer and or a pair of surround sound speakers, but like I said, we're only going to be focusing on the soundbar itself. And besides, Sony does have different subwoofers and surround sound speakers to choose from. Nonetheless, if you want to pick this soundbar up, it'll be linked down below. And if you want to further support the channel, check out the merch shelf down below. I've made some shirts and hoodies that look and feel great. And if you've been watching me for a while, you know I can be very particular. So I'll only set my name on something that I'm really proud of. Now first, let's talk about the design of this soundbar. Now from a material standpoint, the soundbar has a subtle but industrial design to it. The majority of the body is speckled powdered coated plastic, which does a great job of not reflecting any light. And on the front, we've got a metal front grille where at the right angle and with the right amount of light, you're going to be able to see the speakers underneath. And I feel some people will enjoy this design element because personally, I do. However, I do have to point something out that took longer than it should have for me to actually fix it. Now, the A5000 has a front display on it, and it tells you the source that you're using, it tells you the volume, and you can also go through your different settings. Pretty simple. However, by default, this display is always turned on and it's set to its brightest setting. So it can be very distracting, especially when you're watching something in a dark room. Now, in order to turn this display off, you gotta press the dimmer button on the remote control. Initially, I was trying to turn this display off through the app, but the setting just wasn't there. So I thought that I would just point this out because personally, I absolutely hate when soundbars have an always on display or an indicator light because it can be very distracting. Now, when it comes to dimensions, I cannot deny that this soundbar is huge. The A5000 has a length of 47 3/4 inches, a thickness of 5.5 inches, and a height of 2 3/4 inches. I really feel that placing this soundbar can be a challenge for some people. And here it is compared to the Bose Smart Soundbar 900. It's not as long and it's a little thinner. And here it is compared to the Samsung Q800A, which is the smallest soundbar here. However, this soundbar is dependent on its external subwoofer, but that's a whole other story. Overall, what I'm trying to say here is this soundbar is pretty big and it might not fit everywhere. However, you can wall mount this soundbar and wall mounting brackets are included, unlike Bose. But now let's talk about the ports on this soundbar. Now there's an AC port on the back, and thankfully there is no external power brick to worry about hiding. And personally, I do think that this is the bare minimum, just given this soundbar's sheer size. So at least wall mounting this soundbar is going to be a little easier thanks to no power brick. However, I do gotta point out that the included power cable on this soundbar is pretty short, so weaving it through your home theater setup could be a bit of a challenge. Now, like I mentioned earlier, the A5000 has an HDMI input that supports up to 8K HDR, and it also supports 4K 120Hz. Now, 8K HDR is really only going to matter if you've got an 8K TV, 8K content, and a Blu-ray player that can spit out 8K, which isn't super common right now. Now, both the PS5 and Xbox Series X are supposed to support 8K gaming in the future, but they don't truly do just yet. But the fact that this HDMI import supports 4K 120Hz is good, because then this HDMI import isn't going to become a bottleneck if you've got either a PlayStation 5 or Xbox Series X today. But then there's the HDMI output, which has support for both ARC and eARC. Now, if you're going to be strictly streaming your content directly from the TV, then the HDMI output is probably the only port that you'll be using on this soundbar. And if your TV also has eARC support, then you're going to be able to fully enjoy your Dolby Atmos content or any other uncompressed audio format. And you got one HDMI cable included in the box. Now, this soundbar also has a USB-A port, so you can plug in a USB stick and play music off of it, and there's also an optical port just in case your TV doesn't have an HDMI import that has ARC or eARC support. But I'm just being blunt here, if your TV doesn't have ARC support, then you should upgrade your TV before getting a soundbar. Rule of thumb, you usually want to try to use an HDMI connection between your TV and your soundbar. Now, this soundbar does have Wi-Fi, but unfortunately it doesn't have an Ethernet port, and personally I really don't think that's a big deal. Now, the soundbar does have AirPlay 2 support, which is good if you're an iPhone user, and you can also cast to it, which is good if you're an Android user. So as long as you're on the same Wi-Fi network as the soundbar, you can always stream to it. And unlike a lot of other soundbars out there, you can't use the A5000 as a smart speaker. Now, you can tell your voice assistant to stream music to this soundbar, but you can't actually use it as a smart speaker. And personally, I really don't think that's a big deal either. Now, if you don't want to, you don't have to connect the soundbar up to Wi-Fi. You can always connect to it using Bluetooth, and you can always stream music to it that way. And you can also use Bluetooth on this soundbar to connect to a pair of headphones. So that way you can fully enjoy your content late at night without having to worry about waking anybody up. But personally, I do recommend that you connect this soundbar up to Wi-Fi so that you can stream to it from your phone, just as long as you're connected to the same Wi-Fi network. But now let's talk about speaker setups. Now, there are 3 frontward firing speakers, there are 2 frontward firing subwoofers with exhaust ports that shoot out the sides of this soundbar. There are 2 beam tweeters which specifically try to bounce sound off of your walls. And there are 2 additional upward firing speakers which bounce sound off of the ceiling. Overall, this is a very solid setup. And thanks to the upward firing speakers on this soundbar, you're going to get true Dolby Atmos support. Now, what Dolby Atmos is that it's an audio format that allows creators to individually place sounds in a 3-dimensional space. So let's say there's a helicopter on the screen. If the creator chooses to, they can make it sound like that helicopter is above you. Whereas with some other soundbars out there that don't have the upward firing speakers, that helicopter is going to sound like it's coming at you, or it's going to sound like it's at the same level as you. Now, all content doesn't automatically have Dolby Atmos support. Admittedly, it can be a rather premium feature. However, the upward firing speakers on the soundbar does give your audio a good sense of verticality to it, which is then going to give you better immersiveness whenever you're watching a movie with the soundbar. But now let's jump into the sound test. Now, the TV is playing at max volume. The HT-A5000 is playing with its stock EQ, and we're going to be comparing it to the Bose Smart Soundbar 700, a rather comparable soundbar, except it doesn't have those upward firing speakers.
Somewhere and dyed my hair now, wanna be alone. It's much to bear and you don't care, and I won't play alone. I got you in my sight, I keep all the words you said to me. I get you on your knees, rewrite all the things you said that I should be. I'll get sorry. Hate I even loved you, hate I fell in love with you. Hate I even loved you, hate I kinda fell in love with you. Hate I even loved you, hate I fell in love with you. Hate I even loved you, hate I kinda fell in love with you. I cried with you, now wanna be alone. I lied for you, I tried for you, you wouldn't play alone. I got you in my sight, I keep all the words you said to me. I get you, get you, get you, get you on your knees. Rewrite all the things you said that I should be. I'll get you, get you, get you, now you beg me please. Hey, now I stay away, you were never meant to save me. Now I stay away, I'll hear say you're sorry. Hate I even loved you, hate I fell in love with you. Hate I even loved you, hate I kinda fell in love with you. Hate I even loved you, hate I fell in love with you. Hate I even loved you, hate I kinda fell in love with you.
Welcome to the shadows.
45 seconds till ring close, amigos. Don't leave me carrying.
Here, level 5.
Final 2. That's how we... It's go time.
Gonna shut you up. They're turning.
They're shooting. It's back to the torso.
I'm getting. Shut up and die. Recharging shields.
Come on, come on.
10 seconds. I'm getting shot. My shields are recharged. Recharging shields.
Charging on my shield. Taking fire.
Could use some help.
So, like you may have just heard, obviously any soundbar is going to sound better than your TV's built-in speakers. Your TV most likely just has a pair of downward-firing speakers that bounce sound off of the table. They don't get all that loud and they become a rattling mess at higher volumes. And even if you have a more premium TV, like let's say the Samsung Q80A, whose built-in speakers do sound pretty good, if you were to upgrade to a soundbar, it is going to improve your movie watching experience. Now, personally, I'm not the biggest fan of how this soundbar sounds. Just like with most of Sony's other speaker products, this soundbar does lean more towards a warmer sound signature, as in the highs aren't super strong and sometimes the mids can get overpowered by the bass, making it a little hard to hear dialogue sometimes. However, where the soundbar really shines is its bass. The A5000 has a ton of bass to it all by itself. It's gonna have no problem shaking the walls in your house. Now, the A5000 doesn't have as much bass as an external subwoofer, and it doesn't resonate as deep. But the A5000 does have an above average amount of bass for a fully self-contained soundbar. And in this sound test, the A5000 was playing with its bass playing at its medium setting, but you can always kick it up a notch. Now there's also a voice EQ on the soundbar, which is going to help the dialogue sound more pronounced. But personally, I found the sound mode to sound too nasally for my taste. And unfortunately, Sony doesn't give you too many customization options when it comes to tuning your sound. So for this reason, I would mainly recommend the A5000 to someone who prefers a warmer sound signature, or to someone who is looking for a ton of bass out of their soundbar without having to get an external subwoofer. And finally, let's talk about max volume on this soundbar. Now, the A5000 is going to have no problem filling a large room with sound all on its own. But if you were to use the soundbar with a compatible Sony Bravia TV, then this soundbar is going to get even louder. And personally, I think that it's very important to point out that the soundbar is able to fill a large room with sound all on its own. Because if we were to compare it to one of Samsung's soundbars, which can also be used in tandem with a compatible TV, it's only able to fill a large room with sound if it has help from a Q-Symphony TV. Because on its own, the Samsung Q800A is only able to fill a small or medium-sized room with sound. But finally, let's talk about the included remote and app on this soundbar. Now, from a feel standpoint, I think it's time Sony redesigned their remote. This remote looks like something that you would get in the early 2000s, and these buttons feel like complete mush. This remote really leaves you wanting more when compared to more modern remotes. But from this remote, you can adjust your bass, switch between voice and night mode, turn off the display that I mentioned earlier, and you can control your external subwoofer and surround sound speakers if you get them. And this remote is actually more capable than Sony's app. And personally, I actively try to avoid using Sony's app. Sony's apps for their headphones are decent, but for their speakers, not so much. From a usability standpoint, you can't really do much, and from a stability standpoint, I have been having connection issues with this app. So overall, like I said, I do actively try to avoid using this app. So with all that being said, the Sony HT-A5000 is decent, but it certainly isn't for everybody. First, there's the sheer size of this soundbar. It's huge, and it could be a challenge to set up in some home theater setups. Then there's the nature of its warmer sound signature, which ultimately does boil down to preference. Some people will either really like this warmer sound signature, or some other people won't. And then there is the lackluster app and limited customization options. However, the HT-A5000 does have some standout characteristics to it. First off, the A5000 does have an above average amount of bass for a fully self-contained soundbar. The soundbar is going to have no problem shaking the walls in your house, and you don't necessarily need an external subwoofer, especially if you have a small or medium-sized room. Then there's the HDMI input on the soundbar, which supports up to 8K HDR. But more importantly, it can also do 4K at 120Hz, which I feel is more important today. And finally, there's just the overall performance of this soundbar. Unlike some of Samsung's soundbars, which are kind of reliant on a compatible TV, the HT-A5000 is able to perform all on its own. So whether you have a Sony TV or not, the A5000 is going to be able to deliver. Now, if you do have a Sony TV, the A5000 is a decent choice. But depending on your needs or taste, you still might want to go with something else. If you made it this far, I guess you enjoyed the video, so hit the like button and get subscribed. If you want to pick any of the products up, they'll be linked down below. And if you want to further support the channel, check out the merch. I made some shirts and hoodies that look and feel great. And you know, I can be very particular, so I'll only slap my name on something that I'm really proud of.